Okay, let's take a look in here. I'm going to minimize you guys just so I can see the full screen. So this is, quick first pick of the system. Essentially, just a couple high-level things to note. The system is responsive. It's designed to be responsive, but it is largely used at this point in time on relatively large screens. The setup that we are typically used to is that folks will have one screen with their working tool. In this case, it's an insurance tool. And then on their left-hand screen or on their second screen will be our tool, as well as any other support tools that they use, including typically their call center software. There's some variation on how individuals set it up, but that's what we are used to seeing. Some of the items do expand and contract, if you will, for usability. I won't get into every part where that occurs. It's pretty basic, but if you do have any questions, of course, we can cover those at the end as well. The primary goal with the software is for folks to get in here and get their questions answered quickly while on the phone. And I think you guys told a little bit of the backstory, just a rehash. Essentially what we found when we got into a call center is that folks didn't have a place to get their questions answered, and they would do things like line up at their supervisor's desk, wait for them to be off the call, and go ahead and ask their questions then. So it was, of course, very inefficient. It prevented people from getting questions answered, and it really forced these call centers to rely very heavily on the knowledge of their supervisors without having a way to spread that knowledge across other people. So the goal was to share knowledge, to crowdsource knowledge, and to gather that knowledge so that when people did leave, inevitably, it was stored somewhere. So the system is also very, very customizable. So what you are seeing here is, it's my view as a super admin. It has all of the features turned on, but we have created a situation where features can be hidden or chosen depending on what is needed for the client and what type of content they have. The type of content sort of comes in a few different buckets, and they can be viewed sort of differently. This is how we refer to them in our current call center situation. And what we have is we have resources, which are those items, checklists, procedural items that are created by the call center for users to use while doing their job. It is governed by the call center. Typically, it's governed by the people who are telling you what to do. In contrast, we also have manuals. Those are those things like, I'm sure, your unemployment manuals that are canon. They are coming from those maybe larger entities, government entities. Maybe they're coming from the company that manufactured the phone that people call about. Maybe they're the printer company, what have you. They're those items that tend to be more external, and that the folks on the phone are trying to figure out how to absorb, interpret, and use in their daily job. Q&A, pretty intuitive. Those are the questions that people have asked. We'll, of course, dive into each of these features as we go forward. And then the knowledge base, pretty new feature. This is a feature that's designed to sort of capture training-like items for folks on the phone so that they can learn the things they need to learn pretty quickly, or during breaks, in between calls, or even on the call if they know pretty succinctly what they would like to learn. So that's how we view the different content types. It's so customizable that not only can you turn them on, but you can also change the name. So if you prefer the word checklist instead of resources, on the back end, each client can have a different name for those things that make a little bit more sense to them. And we'll get into sort of the nuances of each again as we go forward. The system as a whole is governed by a permission structure that is also customizable. So again, I'm going to show you what we have in our existing situation and what we have learned, but essentially everything you see is governed by those permissions. So if you have a very high level permission setting like I do, I have a lot of choices to curate content, but your more basic user, they might only be able to receive content. In other words, they can do a lot of reading within the system, but they might not be able to click buttons to add new things. And that's by design. This is where we are trying to curate items for the folks on the phone. We are not trying to have them doing the thinking and deciding as much as we are trying to feed them. information for a consistent customer experience, consistent answers to the same types of questions. So those, again, are completely customizable, but that's typically how we view it in our current situation. Based on that governance, there's a few different sort of levels that we group people into that also makes the tool relatively dynamic. The first is what we call a branch, and it's in this upper left-hand corner. And these branches are sort of different business segments or perhaps different customers, as is presented here. And these act really as firewalls, if you will. They're sort of Chinese firewalls where, depending on what branch you are in, you will see different content. If I'm in my FEMA branch because I'm working on a FEMA project or I'm answering FEMA calls, I'm going to see the stuff that pertains to that FEMA branch. But if I toggle over into maybe my Coast Guard branch, I'm going to see different announcements. I'm going to see different content. And we designed this so that folks can be in many portals at once, if you will, without having to sign into many places, but still ensure that they're only seeing the items that pertain to that portal or that topic. Whether this is separate business areas, separate clients, that's completely sort of customizable based on how you decide as a client or as a call center to set it up. Teams also really govern everything. So I might be part of a project, a large project, but I also might be part of individual teams on that project, like the training team, the management team, things like that. And so teams will govern what you see, whereas permissions will govern what you do. And this allows individual teams to also communicate at a pretty specific individual tight level. So I might make a checklist that is just for my team because my team is the only people who do this one specific task, and that can be put in here and assigned or featured only for that team. So it lets you have very high level, big company-wide, call center-wide conversations. It also lets you have very, very specific and targeted conversations to your team. Hopping into features. So I'm going to go ahead and just minimize this sidebar here so that we can see everything. Our vision of the tool and the way we see it being used now is that people will sign in and they will get to this screen. And the first couple of things they see is a search bar. This becomes a huge part of their workflow, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But you'll also see announcements, and these are announcements that are meant to essentially replace email. They're meant to be the place that people come to look for those high-level pieces of info that typically get sent in an email. Usually you see that it's sent to all, and maybe you skim it to see when the next vacation is or something like that. It's really meant to replace that. It's meant to be a place where everybody can come and see those latest and greatest news. It can be, again, just for individual teams, or it can be call center wide. And it's pretty intuitive to make an announcement. You click add an announcement and you will see where you can put your info into this editor here, stylize it in the typical sort of text editing ways. There's also room for type of announcement if you want to sort of give it a sense of urgency. And, again, it is governed by teams and tags. Teams is what governs who can see it. Tags is just a sort of content filter that lets people know what this announcement is about. It doesn't affect permissions or visibility at all, but it is sort of a way to help people understand content quickly. Announcements can also be archived, so you can see the older announcements. Perhaps you've missed a day, perhaps you've missed a few days and something has changed. You can come in here, you can check out what else is in here from those days you missed, or maybe you are trying to remember something that happened 4 weeks ago. You can come scroll through. So it lets us keep a little bit of it again helps us curate those conversations that once they're in your email, email search is not the most amazing thing. It can be hard to find. In email, you got to kind of remember who it was sent to or who it was sent from, what some of the keywords were. This lets you really go to one place and just scroll through to understand what you've missed, what's coming up, and how it relates to you. Also an activity section. This is a quick spot for folks to see the things that they visit most frequently or have visited lately. For the folks who take the same type of calls over and over again, we see a case for people, using this pretty regularly to toggle back and forth between the same resources that they need. But most importantly is this search, and this is where we see people working the most. The idea being that when they get a phone call, they know they have a question they need to answer, they can type in here and kind of quickly get some pop-up information. And the example information I've baked in here is largely related to what we do on the flood insurance side of things. So that's the content you'll see. But this search pops up really pretty quickly, and it gives you an understanding of the results based on content type. So we can see results by manuals, by resources, by this training knowledge base, and by Q&A. And what that lets the users do is sort of quickly understand the level of authority, if you will, of the content. So we know that a manual is something that, in this case, is coming out of FEMA. The way it's going to be written is going to be at a certain level. The type of answer I'm going to be able to get from it is going to be at a certain level. Whereas I know that resources are the things that are checklists. They pertain to my job specifically. They are the things that my managers or the call center team have created for me. So this lets me understand what type of question am I getting and what type of answer do I need, and it helps you decide where to look for your answers. You can toggle between, up here, you'll see the different facets. If I decide I only want to look at my manuals and resources, I can just toggle those so that, I'm putting away those knowledge base and Q&A type items. And again, that lets me curate my experience. That lets me get to my content faster. And of course, if you click on a search result, it's going to take you there. The search is based off of a pretty typical search algorithm. We can certainly go into detail there, but the manuals themselves are in here in a PDF viewer and have a few cool features as well. I do want to just toggle back to the manuals area. You can, of course, without searching, you can toggle to any of these facets. And the manuals sit in an area here where they can be delineated by section. So if you have a manual that is broken into several PDFs, like the flood insurance manual, you can see them in all of their kind of lists here. Or you can see, manuals that don't have those sections. They are just in here regularly. So there's a few different sort of customizations that can happen here as well. And when you get inside a manual, the real meat and potatoes that we see, something that I hear you also have experienced, is getting the manuals interpreted or getting them, what's the right word I'm looking for here, chewed up in a way that makes sense to people using it, getting them through to people in a way that's meaningful. And this is really the meat and potatoes of what we had a problem with as well. The flood insurance manual changes twice a year, and they are just sort of continually dog-eared, highlighted in, printed out. People will literally print out and replace pages that have changed, things like that, and they sit on a desk, just like you had. So the question became, well, if it's sitting on a desk, how are they using it? Can they even use it quickly? And then when that one person leaves, what happens to all the knowledge they accrued? What happens to their sticky notes and their highlights? And the answer, of course, is that it goes away. So we saw not only a very slow experience, in terms of people getting the answers they need and being able to interpret the answers they need, but also this major loss of intel and knowledge. So what we created is the ability to highlight and annotate manuals inside of the system so that those post-it notes, if you will, and those notes do not go away when a person leaves, or when a person's on vacation, or even just when a person can't talk right now because they're on the phone. And the way to do that, I'm going to get to a section here. We're in the public assistance manual, which is one I'm a little less familiar with. But the way to do that is really you basically highlight text and click on the annotation feature, and you're able to use this text editor to make quite meaningful notes. These notes can have any sort of content. It can be as simple as remember this tomorrow, but it can also include HTML links. You know, maybe it's links to external resources. Maybe it is links to a YouTube video that has more information. And then also it can have individual images. It can have audio and video, and then it can have files. So it could be like, you know, the checklist that you referenced. And I have some examples I'd love to show you that are real world examples of how we see these being used. And I've just got to toggle over to them. I believe they're in here. There's a few spots where we have them. The annotations are also searchable. So if I'm doing what I'm doing right now and I'm trying to show you one, I can come in here and make some search. I can toggle between whether or not I'm searching an annotation, the annotations, or searching a PDF. And you'll see that the annotations come up on this right-hand bar, but they also show up in the text. And it looks like this one, I'm just going to cheat and see what page it's on. It's on page 8. So if I'm scrolling here idly and I am looking for my section that I need information on, or I'm looking to see where there's notes, I know that there's annotations when there is a bright green highlight. And when I hover over the annotation, I can see it pop up. I can see what this person said. Now, the annotations, when they are made, they're private, except to your manager. So if I am, you know, a person on the phone, I'm Liz, I'm on the phone, I am making notes to myself, but my manager is able to see them and say, you know, wow, this is a great note, I want to share it with the world, or wow, this is not a good note, and Liz maybe doesn't know something that she needs to know. So it becomes a place for managers to see that and understand where their employees are, but also for them to be able to force the sharing of information. So if I see Liz's note and I think it's a great note, I can make it public to everybody by toggling it into public here. On an annotation in the upper right-hand corner is this option to make it public. And that's me saying, Liz's note is so good that I want to share it with everybody, or it's so on point that I want to share it with everybody. There's also a way to do sort of a top-down curation where I, as the manager, go make all the notes and I make them all public so that everybody can see them. And that is me interpreting the manual for my people and making sure that they can see what they need to see. Looks like I've got a low battery here. Give me 1 second. So there is sort of two ways to think about it, or a combo where you can push that information down, or you can take what people are saying and push it out, depending. And then from that intelligence piece, like I mentioned, you can certainly use it to understand where your people are. If your folks are not getting something, you can use that to impart training. You could use it to make your resources better by saying clearly, you know, something isn't quite right. We need to make this better. There's a lot of opportunity by seeing the notes that people are making and deciding what to do with it. If I follow on the annotation search here, these annotations are also clickable. So I can see that this is on page 8 and I'm going to ask it to take me to it. And you'll see that this box is actually a big square. It is not highlighted text. The previous one, or a previous example, we highlight text to make annotations. And that makes that sticky note right on that set of text. But we also found that there is a case to be made for annotating pictures, especially in the flood world. There's a lot of examples of pictures that demonstrate, you know, a good type of flood venting, or demonstrate the right way to elevate a building. Things like that come up all the time. So the question became, how do we make notes on pictures and not just text? And we've built in a feature to do that. Gotta get to the top of my viewer here. And that's really just a toggle here. You'll see I'm on my highlight toggle. That's going to let me highlight text. And here I can actually switch this toggle. And this is going to let me highlight pictures. So I can draw a box around an image and I can make an annotation that way. So maybe I'm saying that this is the latest FEMA logo. And that will let me choose my tags and teams so that folks can, the people who need to see it on, you know, the right teams can see it. And so the tags can help tell them what that information is about-ish. I might choose a file if I wanted to also upload maybe the FEMA logo that we're supposed to be using, and I can click save. And that's going to tell people that there is a note about this logo that they need to see, and that note will show when they hover. So that's the annotations. I think it's a pretty clever way that we have found to make sure that those notes are available. It does involve a little bit of curation in the sense that managers do need to decide if a note is worth sharing, but it has been relatively smooth for managers to do that. I will say from our experience so far, a lot of what we have noticed is a combination of top-down and bottom-up, where there is a lot of curation that occurs where a new manual will come out, managers will review that manual and go through and make their notes that they want people to see and sort of intentionally create those public notices. But then also, you know, individuals will naturally make their own notes for themselves, again, knowing that their manager will see it. So, you know, good appropriate notes that a manager might want to see and share. And then managers will go ahead and make those public and available to other folks. So that's the manual section. It is, in the insurance world, probably the most heavily used for us, but it competes well with the resources section. Let me also mention to you how manuals are put in, because I see I didn't really do that here. And if we go back to that main area, a manual can be added. It's a fully manual addition process where you are clicking add manual, and you are deciding what the file name is, as well as whether or not it has sections. And if it has sections, it will allow you to upload all those individual PDFs. If it doesn't, it'll have you just do the one. So it is currently a manual process for me as a manager or as a curator to make sure I have that manual in hand and upload it. But once that is done, there is this additional unique feature that I'd love to show you where the manuals can be compared. And this is, for us, has been very important because those little nuanced changes, you know, they make a big difference. They are typically a policy change that we need to be aware of and that we need to incorporate into our workflow. And so you can do that by clicking on this little orange dial here. And this is going to take you to a version comparison workflow. And in order to go into this workflow, you are basically going to tell the system what you want to compare to what. So I'm in the 2017 version, and I've asked it to compare to the 2016 version. And then it's going to let me do that. It tells me about the number of changes. There's been quite a bit in this one. And it's going to let me look at what those changes are on a side-by-side basis. And it will highlight the changes in red, as you will see. And some of those changes might not be very meaningful. It might be something like the type of font change or spacing changes that have occurred. But it will also let us compare the more meaningful items. It's basically going to flag everything. We've got our little tour guide here to help us through that, but I'm going to skip it. And so I can scroll between these two and I can look. And as a manager, I see maybe this effective date change is important. I can go ahead and make my annotation now as a manager. I can make it to say, okay, I need to annotate this because this is a big deal change. And so I can make that note for my user here and have it save. The other thing that you can do, and I don't know if it exists here, but if there was already a public annotation in this document, I can also move it to the new spot that it should go in the manual. So that way we aren't having to remake our notes from last time. We are able to take that information and take that meaningful work that we've done and just shift them over to the new page or the new place in the manual that it's supposed to sit. So again, it is a manual process. That's confusing, but it's a manual process to get these in here. But it does let us save that work. So instead of every person taking their individual sticky notes and move them over, we as managers are able to look at everything that's public and say, this still applies, this is still important, let's move it over. So that's kind of a cool extra feature. This is a pretty new feature, and it came from seeing this issue occur where a new manual would come out and we would have all this great data, and then we'd have to pause and say, okay, what do we do with it? Do we remake everything? Is everything worth remaking? Does it still apply? And we had to do the manual labor to go back through and read everything and say, yes, this applies. No, this doesn't apply anymore. Oh, look, we have the same annotation twice. Let's remove one. Things like that. So this was a creative solution to that, where we said, what if we let the system help us a little bit so that we could just sort of drag and drop and move things over. So interesting and new feature. I'm going to toggle to resources. This is the second most used area, like I mentioned. I think that's fair to say. And this is really where those checklists would reside, or those kind of working documents. This area specifically, people don't typically toggle straight to, I would say. Some people do, but mostly you're coming here through search. They are organized though. If you do come this way, they're organized by their tags. So you can see sort of which tags have which content. You can filter by tags and just check out the things that pertain to what you might be looking for, and you can toggle into the resource. Pretty typical PDF viewer. Again, these resources are meant to be sort of really quick job aids. They're meant to be the interpretation of the different manuals or the different policy that's put down. They're version controlled. So if I wanted to toggle to a later version, I could toggle down, for an earlier version rather. You know, maybe this was originally made in October 2017. I might need to look at that for some reason. Maybe I'm looking for the rules that were in place back then because we are dealing with a claim that is old or something like that. So there's a version control element. You'll always come to the latest version, but you can go back and look at what might have changed, much like you can with the manuals. You can certainly download the resource, although we like to have people in here using it, so they're always using the latest and greatest. And then you can also ask a question. If you do ask a question, it is going to take you to the question and answer area. And creatively, it's going to add the resource right to the question so that everyone is clear what you're asking a question on or what resource maybe didn't answer your question. So from a manager's perspective, some good data can come from that, from knowing that someone went this route of asking a question, but also allows users to get a chance to get their questions answered. Adding a resource, just to toggle back there real quickly. Sorry, I'm probably driving the screen recording a little crazy, but the manual area or the resources area here also very intuitive to upload. If I am a manager and I need to upload a new version, I'm just going to be able to toggle. Looks like our chat support's covering a little bit, but toggle to upload the newest version. Really intuitive, not a lot. It's very light. There's not kind of a lot of finicking around to do if you're a manager and need to get this done. Q&A is meant to be that crowdsourced information. It's meant to be questions that are coming in from the people on the floor or the people out in the field who have questions. And the goal is to get their questions answered. It's also to learn more about and understand what questions are coming in and hopefully use that and turn that into meaningful operational data. You know, to say what are people having trouble with, what training can we make, or what operational changes can we make to prevent these troubles. Pretty intuitive. It's, you know, you ask a question, and as I showed before, there is, you know, a text editor here where you can do that. Again, tags and teams do affect who sees it. Teams really is what affects who sees it. I need to work on how I say that. And tags act as that content filter to help people understand what the content is about. And if we go to answer an existing question, it's also quite intuitive. You're just answering in a text editor. You can also comment, you know, hey, I had the same question, I haven't gotten an answer, things like that. Some added features, we experienced that this area became, I won't say problematic, that's not a great word, but we did learn a lot about this area from our users once we started using it. And it was it was problems I did not expect. One of the main issues was like this idea of who should be allowed to ask the question and is there such thing as a good question? So that was really interesting. And it came from fear that questions would get in here that weren't worded correctly, or that people would answer that didn't have the right information. They were answering with the wrong information. So in the second iteration, we had to ask ourselves, what do we do about that? How do we make this more manageable so that the right people are asking the right questions and or the right people are answering questions correctly? And so we came up with a few additional features. Some are pretty simple filters here. So if I'm a manager, I can come in here and just look at what's unanswered and answer them pretty quickly without having to worry about wading through a bunch of stuff. The other active is the more current questions. It's the questions from the last 24 hours. There haven't been any. All of our questions are from a couple of days ago or 20 days ago, maybe. So I can come in here and toggle pretty quickly to see what's going on in my team and what might they need. We also added an export and subscribe feature. And this is going to let managers get basically email alerts and or get an exported CSV of what is going on. So again, to make their job easier, allow them to curate. You can subscribe daily, weekly, and monthly, and you can also subscribe to specific tags. So if I know that I am the manager of the claims team and I'm in charge of answering all the claims questions, I can just get the claims related questions and go ahead and get them answered. If I get this daily, maybe I can put it into practice that I'm going to answer every morning. If I get it weekly, maybe my practice is to answer every Friday, whatever that might be. Of course, you can also use this to keep a pulse on what's going on. If maybe you're not in charge of answering, but you just want to know what people are having trouble with, or you want to know what issues are causing the most concern, things like that, you can go ahead and subscribe to. You can also export a few different export options. You might be exporting for the same reasons to see what's out there. Maybe you have to export to share this data with someone not in the portal. Maybe you have a committee that is in charge of interfacing with the unemployment folks, for example, and they need to provide these questions for them to give them answers. Things like that, this could be used. So just a cool new feature related to that problem that we experienced. It's something that is brand new, so we don't have a lot of understanding of totally how it is used. We have a lot of understanding on how it could be used and how we would use it ourselves in our own portal, because we do have our own iteration actually in our company. Finally, just really quickly, we have this knowledge base area, and this is where we keep what we would call training level tools. These are meant to be sort of blog-like, tutorial-like pieces of content. We don't envision that a lot of this would be used by someone on the phone because you might not have time to read it all. But if you get off the phone and you realize, man, I don't know about that topic, or I need a way to learn more about what my company says about this issue, I can come in here and find articles and those types of curated content to read through quickly. This is, again, a new feature. We don't know a lot about our users here. We came onto this as trainers, so we create training. We very much have a content creation type lens. And in our original portal iteration, all of our training was outside of the portal. It was, HR compliance-based training. So we needed a way to very specifically understand that people had gone through a certain training regimen. This is much more individualized training. It's much more intended for quick consumption. It's not necessarily something you would use in that certificate level type training per se, although if you could find a way to manage it, you certainly could. Those are the high level features. I'll just point out a few other things. I think I've gone over time a little bit here, but we do have this area, and it's covered by my Zoom bar, so bear with me, but it's that shows us sort of the most visited items, or the most frequently visited, or last visited, most recently visited. It's very similar to what was on your front page, but if you are in the middle of a workflow, it's very hard to toggle back to that front page. So you can see it here. You can also see quick links, and these are the links that are being provided to you by the company that they might want you to use frequently. They are pretty customizable. They're created with a typical text editor. So you'll see on this first one, I didn't include an actual hyperlink, but you can, as you'll see on this second one I have, you can also include things like a description. Why might I use that link? So this is curated and again, gives people an easy, quick place to see the links that you want them to have. They're largely external links. And then favorites, this is a place for individuals to curate the things that they use or want to have access to quickly. It is completely individual. It's not seen or curated in any way by managers. And to get on the favorites, just like you might in Firefox, you're just going to hit a star here to get it on your favorites list, and you'll see our favorite success message. So really lets people do a lot of individual things, and then lets managers and different curators, maybe your trainers or any sort of committees you might have that are in charge of making this stuff, it lets them do that in here as well. I can get into administrative. I certainly don't have to, but there is, from an administrative perspective, different things that are set, and then different features to help with the administrative. So, teams, tags, roles, and users all have to be set up, of course. And then there are things like reports where you can learn a little bit more about what your users are doing. They're very basic. We do have some visions for the future on these, but for the most part, it's the stuff that you can use, again, to get kind of a quick pulse on what's going on inside the portal. If there are no views, does that mean it's broken? Does it mean that people aren't using it? What can you use out of this to make meaningful change in your organization? So some basic reporting features, and then very basic billing feature that lets you see any invoices you have. It's not a payment portal, but just is a way for us to communicate with our client how much they are spending or whether or not a new invoice has dropped. So pretty basic, something that could be built out more in the future, but right now is really just coming from that lens of informing people. That is the system in a nutshell. Do we want to take questions now, or do we want to look at the administrative side at all? What are you thinking?
Let's take a look at the administrative side, if you can just give us a high level there. Sure.
So on the administrative side, I think the real high level, is really what we can do with customers. It is enterprise software, so we have multiple portals in here, as you'll see, and it gives us a high level understanding of what's going on session-wise, what users are doing. There are global reports. But most excitingly, and the thing that I do want to share, is the customization piece. From the administrative side, like I said, there's a lot on these first pages that let us understand what could be going on. But once we get into editing, this is also where we can make the portal look the way it looks and function the way it functions. So when we set up a portal, we're going to set up all of the sort of typical customer details, nothing profoundly exciting per se, but we're going to decide specifically the number of branches, how many different business segments do you need that shouldn't ever cross paths, and how, what do you want them to be labeled as? Also, interestingly, is we can customize the domains that are able to sign in and whether or not users will use usernames or use domains. And this is sort of a security feature. We know that someone's not going to go in and add a bunch of random Gmail, Hotmails, or anything like that. But it also lets us help with the user experience because it lets us know how their usernames are going to be set up, so we can be pretty consistent there. Other interesting types of configurations is the theme. The colors you have seen in this one were set by us using hex codes in this case, but we can easily change those. Maybe I want this to be 7384. That's a pretty minor change. Maybe I want everything to just be in this teal color. You can see my icons changing. We can also change the navigation top bar. Perhaps I want it to be this blue. So we can customize the look and feel. We can white label it with the logo of the entity and, you know, just make it feel a little bit more like it's yours, which is pretty cool. We did not have this previously. As I mentioned, we can customize who has access to, which customers have access to the parts of the portal. If a customer does not ever want their people asking questions and answers because they are worried that there are bad questions and that there are bad answers, they could simply not have this as an option. Maybe they don't want the tutorial area either. Maybe they think it'll cause confusion or conflict with their HR program. We can toggle those on and off. And in addition to that, we can also reterm them. So we call manuals manuals, but maybe you call them guidance documents. We can change that here to say in the manual or in the portal, it's going to be called guidance documents. Maybe knowledge bases tutorials, maybe resources as checklists. You get the idea. But this is going to allow us to, again, customize to the language of the client and make sure that people fully understand what they're getting in each of those areas. I'm not going to hit save just for the sake of not overwriting what I've done here, but also interesting is role configuration. I mentioned there are so many different combinations, and we have two ways of doing this. One is to just let the portal folks decide what their roles will be, and they would do that inside the portal in this roles area. I've just toggled over. You can see where I can create a new role, and I can decide on all sorts of permissions. Once I set a role, I can decide who can do what for all of these things, all of these features. But we can also decide on the administrative side, hey, we don't want to give people that much power, or we are worried that they will not understand the roles well enough to do this. We can say that they cannot configure their own roles. And if we do that, we will configure the roles here. And we have found this to actually be a pretty important feature because our current client definitely struggled with role creation. We found that they made it very, very complex for things that weren't actually meaningful. As an example, they made a manager role and a training manager role. And factually speaking, those are two different people, but they actually didn't have any different permissions at all. So it was really a role in name only. And then when it got to managing them, they got sort of confused because they were like, well, why do we have two? What's the difference? And we found that we learned a lot about helping them configure their roles. So we decided that being able to customize who configures can help us both hand off management really quite easily, you know, to say, here's your portal, have fun, or to say, let's walk through this step by step and understand your need and help you get a very curated and specific experience. So that's a unique thing for us to be able to do on our end. Two other interesting Ooh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, good. Sorry, I thought you were done.
Oh, no. Just two other quick ones, and these will be fast. But one thing that we have not used a lot of also came up is creating search configurations where we can essentially create, it's not really search aliases, but we can create help text to help folks understand, to help folks go to new searches from their old bad searches, if you will. So if somebody searches coronavirus and everything in here says COVID-19, we can actually configure that so that when they search, it will pop up and say, did you mean COVID-19 instead of coronavirus? What's been powerful about this, or what we think is powerful about it, is that we are able to learn from the back end all of the search data and see what people keep searching for incorrectly and use that to inform this area. So if we know people are always calling COVID-19 coronavirus, we can actually say, you know, we can make that search term so that they get that fed into them. And first of all, hopefully retrain them a little bit to think in those terms, but also just make sure they're getting the information they need, because that's really at the end of the day what's important. And sorry for my example, I couldn't think of a faster one. So a lot of power there. Right now you can make, the help text can be just text, or it can also be a link to a new search. So if you say, did you mean COVID-19? So COVID-19 can be clickable if you format it that way. Also interesting is support configuration. You saw earlier I had my support button was sort of in the way here. That is a, and this, I'll toggle back, that is in the lower right hand corner here. That is the Chatlio search bot that we use, but we also recognize that different customers would probably have different support needs, that they would have different support expectations. So we also configured this area where you can detail how to get help. So maybe it is sending an email, maybe it is calling a phone number. We can customize the picture, we can customize the text to tell them what to do there, and then we can customize these buttons for phone or email or both. That's going to let us on our end be a little bit more dynamic in terms of what we agree to do with people, you know, the contracts we have and the support contracts we agree to, but it's also going to let us leverage the tools that they might already use or the expectations that they have already set. So if their trainers, for example, are supposed to be the people answering those questions, we can put the trainer email in here and say, you know, have at it and let them be the administrators. So again, just an opportunity for customization that we found was pretty important once we got going here. I think those are the customizations that are probably most meaningful to you. The rest is sort of typical, but happy to answer any questions or go over anything in more detail.
Thanks, Liz.
Yeah, for sure. Hope that was helpful.
Can you head back and show me the search again?
Sure. Let's get back to my dashboard here, and I'll just do, let's say, flood. I know there's a lot of flood related stuff in here. So you'll see that I clicked, and I'll do it again a little slower. I'm clicking in here, but as I start, it does pop up this more intuitive search. We did that for spacing purposes. We wanted to be able to customize for everybody, but we couldn't find a great way to do that in the single search bar that we have in the center there.
And tell me again the way that you're thinking about the knowledge base.
The knowledge base we think of as like a set of tutorials or longer form question and answer. It's meant to be training in a way where people have a chance to read and consume a little bit more information about a topic or give an idea. So
in a typical kind of call flow, if I was doing a research on flood, they could go to a manual, they could go to the resources, or they could go to the KM. And it sounds like you track where they actually go to get answers against their search.
Yeah, on the back end, we do have tracking to see what they are doing. It's obviously not something we typically look at in real time, but we can understand, which they start to prefer, and we can use that to inform content decisions in the future.
So if I grab the manual, then can now I search while I'm in the manual? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so if we go in, there is a search on the right-hand bar, and it's going to search two things. So if I type in effective dates, I'm not sure which section I'm in here, how to write, I can see annotations coming up, or I can toggle here to search just the PDF, and that is this PDF on the left-hand side, and I will search that again. It actually already came up with its results as I was doing it. So I've got my annotation results, my PDF results, and you'll see that there is the page number. If I click on this, it's going to take me right to where those results are. And it should be highlighted in black here, I believe. Although I'm not seeing it highlighted. I could be wrong about that. Definitely don't quote me on that. But it's taking me to that area, and it's showing us in this this sidebar, it's highlighting the word effective. We can see that it's in here, 5 or 6 times. Again, those searches are algorithm based, so it is based on frequency, amongst other things.
And do the reps typically go to Q&A first, or resources first before they would go to the manual, or is there not a typical flow?
That's a really good question, and I don't have an answer on typical flow. I will tell you, our client has taught us a lot about Q&A. That has been interesting. The vibe we get right now from our current client is that Q&A is not really trusted, And that, in our opinion, comes from the top down. Essentially what happened is users are discouraged from asking questions. And it's only managers who are supposed to ask questions and put answers. They've chosen to curate it from that top-down approach. And so what happens is that if the managers don't make the time to go do that and really curate it heavily, there isn't a lot in there. And so in the current iteration, there's not a lot, and it's just unfortunately very underused. So, and again, that's like, we wouldn't suggest doing it that way. It's sort of an unfortunate thing that we are trying to remediate through the Q&A options and the exporting options and the things we're trying to do to foster managers, foster them doing that curation more. But right now, resources and manuals are definitely the most used. I would say they almost always toggle by searching. It seems less common for them to go to a specific resource than for them to actually search for something. What we have found that is interesting is when they want a resource, they search for the resource name. So instead of typing effective dates like I did in my example, they will type in things like effective date checklist. So we know that they know it's the document name, we know that they have learned that, and we know what they're expecting to get from that search. So that's been an interesting finding as well.